The morning had begun like any ordinary weekday, with bright daylight spilling across the polished entrance of Halcyon Tower and streams of employees hurrying through the revolving doors. Nobody expected that within minutes, a single sentence from a quiet janitor would stop the most powerful woman in the building from getting into her own car. "Don't get in the car," the janitor shouted, his voice echoing across the marble entrance. The CEO froze with one hand on the door handle. Several executives turned in disbelief. A security guard stepped forward, ready to intervene. But the janitor was not trying to embarrass her. He was trying to save her from a danger nobody else had noticed. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can create second chances and that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who makes the biggest difference, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. His name was Everett Hale, a 38-year-old single father who worked as a janitor at Halcyon Tower. He arrived every morning before sunrise, long before the executives came to work, carrying a faded lunch bag in one hand and a small photograph of his 8-year-old daughter, Nia, tucked inside his wallet. Everett had once dreamed of becoming an electrical technician, but life had taken him down another road. After his wife died following a sudden illness several years earlier, Everett had learned that dreams sometimes had to wait when a child needed breakfast, school shoes, and someone to hold her hand when the world felt frightening. Everett never complained about his job. He cleaned floors, emptied bins, polished elevators, replaced light fixtures, and quietly repaired things other people ignored. Most executives barely noticed him. To them, he was simply part of the building, like the elevators or the security cameras. But Everett noticed everything. He noticed the loose tile near the western entrance. He noticed which elevator made a strange sound before maintenance was called. He noticed which employees looked exhausted and which ones secretly cried in the stairwell after difficult meetings. He also noticed small things because noticing small things had become part of keeping Nia safe. Nia was the reason Everett accepted every extra shift he could get. She was a bright, curious girl who loved astronomy and carried a notebook filled with drawings of planets, rockets, and imaginary constellations. She often waited for her father in the small staff room after school because Everett could not afford after-school care every day. While he worked, Nia did homework at a corner table, occasionally helping him fold towels or organize cleaning supplies. Everett always told her that honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. He wanted her to grow up knowing that a person's value was never measured by the uniform they wore. Across the building, the woman who rarely noticed Everett was Celestine Rowe, Halcyon Tower's 42-year-old CEO. Celestine was respected, intimidating, and constantly surrounded by assistants and executives. Her company had grown rapidly under her leadership, but success had also made her cautious. Every morning, a black luxury sedan waited outside the entrance to take her to meetings. Her driver, Marcus Bellamy, was usually punctual and professional, and Celestine trusted him completely. That Tuesday morning, Celestine stepped out of the elevator at exactly 9:05. She wore a charcoal business suit, a crisp white blouse, and black heels. Her dark hair was tied neatly at the back of her head, and she carried a leather portfolio filled with documents for the company's most important acquisition of the year. Her assistant followed closely behind, explaining that investors were already waiting for her at a nearby conference center. Outside, the weather was clear and bright. Sunlight reflected from the tower's glass walls, and the black sedan stood at the curb with its rear passenger door open. Celestine walked toward it without hesitation. Everett was pushing a cleaning cart across the lobby when he heard a faint sound. He stopped. At first, it was barely noticeable beneath the noise of footsteps and conversation. A tiny metallic clicking sound seemed to come from the area near the curb. Everett looked toward the sedan. Something about the vehicle immediately caught his attention. He had spent years repairing machines and electrical equipment before becoming a janitor. He knew what normal mechanical sounds were supposed to be. This was different. Everett abandoned his cart and hurried outside. Celestine had already reached the open door. That was when Everett shouted the words that would change both their lives. "Don't get in the car." The entire entrance went silent. Celestine turned sharply. Her assistant stared at Everett as though he had completely lost his mind. One of the security guards moved toward him. Everett raised his gloved hand, not aggressively, but urgently. He pointed toward the underside of the sedan. There was a small dark object near the rear wheel assembly. Everett explained that he had noticed something unusual while cleaning the pavement earlier that morning. A small metal component appeared to have come loose beneath the vehicle, and he had seen a thin wire-like piece hanging near the underside. He did not know exactly what it was, but he knew one thing: nobody should get inside until a trained mechanic and security team inspected it. Celestine stared at the vehicle, then at Everett. For a moment, nobody moved. Security immediately closed the area around the car. The driver looked confused because he had checked the vehicle earlier. A trained technician was called, and within minutes the sedan was examined carefully. The problem turned out to be a serious mechanical fault near the rear wheel assembly. The vehicle should not have been driven in that condition. A sudden failure at speed could have caused a major accident. The discovery stunned everyone. Celestine slowly looked back at Everett. The janitor who had been invisible to her that morning had just noticed something that trained professionals had missed. But the story did not end there. Instead, it became the beginning of something much bigger. Celestine asked Everett how he had noticed the problem. He explained that he paid attention to sounds because he had spent years repairing equipment. He also admitted that he had not been certain what was wrong. He simply knew the sound was unusual and believed it was better to stop someone for 30 seconds than regret staying silent forever. That answer stayed with Celestine. Later that afternoon, she learned something else about Everett. Her assistant discovered that he worked extra hours almost every evening and often brought his daughter into the staff room after school. Celestine happened to see Nia sitting quietly at the table, drawing a picture of a rocket while waiting for her father to finish his shift. Nia looked up when Celestine entered. Instead of being frightened by the powerful CEO, she simply smiled and held up her drawing. Celestine noticed that the rocket had been labeled the Second Chance. She asked why. Nia explained that her father had told her people should always be willing to give one another chance because everyone made mistakes and everyone sometimes needed help. Celestine stood quietly. Those words struck a place in her heart she had kept closed for years. Her own father had been the founder of Halcyon Tower. He had taught her to work hard, but after his death, Celestine had become obsessed with proving that she could carry his legacy alone. She had slowly stopped trusting people. She had begun measuring everyone by titles, salaries, and achievements. Yet the person who had protected her that morning was a janitor who had nothing to gain from helping her. That evening, Celestine reviewed Everett's employment record. She discovered that he had repeatedly been passed over for technical positions despite having years of experience. His supervisor had written that Everett was dependable, intelligent, and exceptionally observant. But Everett had never had the money or time to complete the certifications required for a better position. Celestine could have simply given him a bonus. Instead, she offered him something far more meaningful. She created a paid training position inside the company's facilities department, allowing Everett to study electrical maintenance while continuing to support his daughter. The company also arranged an after-school program for employees' children, including Nia. Everett was stunned. He initially wondered whether he had earned it. Celestine told him that he had. Not because he had saved her. Because he had already spent years proving that he cared about doing his job properly, even when nobody was watching. Months passed. Everett completed his certification and became a facilities technician. He was still the same man who arrived early, still carrying his faded lunch bag, still checking every door and listening to every strange sound. But now people stopped when he walked past. Executives asked for his opinion. Younger employees sought his advice. And Nia began visiting the building less often because Everett could finally afford a proper after-school program. One afternoon, Celestine found Everett standing beside a newly installed electrical system, checking every connection carefully. She asked him whether he ever imagined that one ordinary morning would change his life. Everett smiled and said that he had learned something from raising Nia. Sometimes the biggest changes begin with doing one small thing correctly. Celestine smiled back. She realized that morning had taught her the same lesson. The person who shouted, "Don't get in the car," had not been trying to become a hero. He had simply refused to ignore something that looked wrong. And that was what made the moment so powerful. Everett had spent years believing that his work made him invisible. But that morning proved that being overlooked did not mean being unimportant. His story also changed the culture inside Halcyon Tower. Celestine introduced a company program recognizing employees who demonstrated kindness, responsibility, and courage. The first award was given to Everett. When he stepped onto the small stage to accept it, he brought Nia with him. She stood beside her father holding her astronomy notebook. Everett looked at the crowd of executives and employees and became emotional. He said that his daughter had taught him that every person carries a story others cannot see. Some people carry dreams. Some carry worries. Some carry responsibilities. And sometimes, all a person needs is for someone to notice them. Celestine applauded from the front row. She understood that the greatest lesson had never been about a car. It had been about people. About how easily society overlooks someone because of their uniform, job title, income, or position. And about how one small act of courage can open a door that changes an entire future. Years later, Nia would still keep the drawing of the rocket labeled "The Second Chance." She would eventually become an engineer, inspired by the father who taught her that honest work mattered and the woman who gave him an opportunity when she could have simply walked away. Everett never forgot that morning. Neither did Celestine. And whenever someone asked why Halcyon Tower had changed its employee culture so dramatically, Celestine always gave the same answer: because one ordinary janitor cared enough to speak when everyone else stayed silent. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a reminder that goodness still matters. And before the story ends, I have one special request. Comment, "Kindness can change everything," if you believe that one small act of courage can give someone a second chance. Because sometimes, the person standing quietly in the background is carrying the biggest heart in the room. Sometimes the uniform hides a lifetime of sacrifice. And sometimes, the voice nobody expected to hear is the very voice that saves the day. Everett went to work that morning expecting nothing more than another long shift. He came home that evening knowing something he would never forget. You do not have to be powerful to make a difference. You only have to care enough to speak when it matters.